have these non-Pauline terms. You have the parallelism, you have the kerusso, you have the technical terms delivered and received, you have the Aramaic cephas. So there's a lot of reasons to think that this is oral tradition that Paul had passed along to them that he had received.
1 Corinthians 15, verses 3-8. Let me just read this passage. And the reason we're reading it's probably the earliest and best evidence for the resurrection and the appearances in the entire Bible, the entire New Testament. And even atheistic scholars, as Dr. Lacona will explain to us after this, take this as very early. So let me just read it, and you'll hear a rhythm to it. You'll hear the word "that" a few times. Here's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, meaning Peter, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, as it were, to one untimely born, he appeared to me also. Now, Dr. Lacona, how early do even atheist scholars admit this testimony is, and why do they admit it's that early?
Let's talk about why first. First of all, Paul uses two technical terms in the Greek here to introduce it. I delivered to you what I also received. And these are technical terms that are usually used to introduce oral tradition. So that's one thing. I delivered to you what I also received. Then we find what's called parallelism in there. This would be a way to help you memorize. Parallelism would be long, short, long, short. So the actual creedal part or oral tradition is mainly found in verses 3-5, and it's that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, long, and that he was buried, short, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, long, and that he appeared, short. So you've got that. Then he appeared to Cephas, which is Aramaic term, and it's not Greek there. And then he appeared to the 12 and so forth. And then later on, you get to verses 11, 12, and 14. And Paul changes the term here from euangelion or euangelizo, the verb, to kerugma, the noun, kerusso, the verb. Kerugma is the Greek word from which we get the English kerygma, which refers to official public proclamation. So it's like a White House press release. This is official public proclamation. And Paul says, whether I or they, he's talking about the apostles here, because he calls himself the least of the apostles, but he worked harder than they did. He said, whether I or they, that is the other apostles, this is what we preach, kerusomai, and this is what you believed. So when he uses the word preach there, he's using the kerygma, which points back to official public proclamation, which would be like creedal. So there's a lot of different reasons here. He also uses, I think he died for our sins, plural, whereas elsewhere Paul uses the singular sin. He uses the aorist tense here in one case, I think it is, whereas elsewhere he uses a different kind of past tense. So you have these non-Pauline terms. You have the parallelism, you have the kerusso, you have the technical terms delivered and received, you have the Aramaic cephas. So there's a lot of reasons to think that this is oral tradition that Paul had passed along to them that he had received. Now, why is it early? Paul's writing this to the church at Corinth around the year 55, 56. He established the church there in 51. So when he says, I delivered to you when? In 51. What I had also received prior to 51. And we don't know exactly when Paul received this in its format as a creed. But it was before 51, of course. And since Paul talks about how tradition came out of Jerusalem, we would assume that this, and I think rightly so, everything would point to this creed coming out of Jerusalem, from the Jerusalem church and approved by the Jerusalem apostles. And since Paul had run his gospel message past them and got it approved around the year 49, perhaps a little bit before, at the Jerusalem Council that he talks about in Acts 15 and in Acts chapter 2, Galatians chapter 2, whatever gospel message Paul preached is also what the Jerusalem apostles were preaching. So what's remarkable about this, Frank, you've got the death, burial, resurrection, and appearances of Jesus, that through Paul, we can get back to knowing that this is what the Jerusalem apostles had been and were, even at that time, preaching about Jesus. So even if, I mean, I get goosebumps thinking about this sometimes because, you know, I read all this stuff that's written by skeptical scholars and see what they're saying and all the stuff that they come out with against the Gospels. Even if everything they said about the Gospels is true, through this creed in 1 Corinthians 15 by Paul, we can actually get back to the preaching of the apostles. It's like, this is amazing. This is historical